Car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis, Wright, and host David Lamb.
Good evening and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Got an interesting topic of conversation tonight. Our guest introductions are on the way. Before we do that, some ground rules. First of all, attorneys from Hollis Wright stand by during each and every show. Live, confidential, and off-air conversation. Yours for the taking. Some free legal advice. Just pick up the phone and give them a call. Now, if you want to text the show, here are the numbers you need to know. Write these down. Area code 205-670-1949. That's the text number. And give us a call, 844-LAW-TALK, 844-LAW-TALK, or 844-529-8255. Leading our conversation tonight from the firm of Hollis Wright, Carter Clay. Good to see you, my friend. You doing good?
I'm doing well, David. I hope you're doing well.
Doing good. Thank you.
Yeah, so tonight we're not going to be talking about a real warm and fuzzy topic. We've covered this topic many times on the show before, and it is a very important topic. We're going to be talking about abuse and neglect of elderly people and children. And one of the reasons, obviously, that it's not a very feel-good type topic to cover is the tragic circumstances that can arise from these types of situations. And a lot of times, it's not necessarily a stranger that is engaging in the abuse or neglect of the child or the elderly person. It's a family member. And so that makes it a little more of a touchy subject, a little bit more of a sensitive subject, but it is a ripe area for attorneys to be involved in for in a lot of different ways, not only from a criminal standpoint, but a civil standpoint. And we're very fortunate tonight to have Tommy James here with us to share information with us about this particular topic. And one of the statistics that I looked at, Tommy, before we got started is that individuals who have a physical or mental disability are 4 to 10 times greater chance of being the subject of abuse and neglect than those individuals without disabilities. And that really was a statistic that hit home with me, because you realize and appreciate just how vulnerable these individuals are. But at any rate, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about your legal practice and how you got involved in handling these types of cases.
Yeah, Clay, thanks for having me again. I've been practicing law for about 22 years, and I started having cases against the mental health department, state mental health department, suing caregivers of the mentally ill, the mentally disabled. Kind of went from there, and it's kind of a little niche practice now, where a lot of these cases involve abuse and neglect of the mentally ill, the mentally disabled, like you said, the children, our elderly. It's our most vulnerable people. And like you said, it's staggering what's going on with these abuse and neglect cases. They're everywhere, because these are the people that sometimes can't cry out for help, and they need help. They're the ones who need the most help.
What are the different types of abuse that are being perpetrated on these types of individuals?
Yeah, abuse can range from anything from physical assault, sexual assaults, even murder. Neglect is a part of an abuse too. If somebody is relying on somebody else's care, this can be a parent, a nurse, a caregiver, a mental health worker, something like that. If they're supposed to be watching somebody who can't take care of themselves like every 15 minutes to ensure that, their needs are met and they don't do it, or if they just totally ignore their patients or whoever's under their care, that's more like neglect.
But yeah, and I guess just to differentiate between the two, when we're talking about abuse, really generally what we're talking about is somebody engaging in some form of intentional act against the disabled person. But when we're talking about neglect, we're really just talking about someone or some entity being negligent or unreasonable in how they take care of someone. Did I characterize that correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You got that exactly right.
All right, and talk a little bit about, because I guess these types of cases can really take on two different tracks, and sometimes both tracks apply. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's a criminal track, criminal prosecution, and sometimes it's just a civil action. Talk in general about those two tracks.
Yeah, most of my cases, they do have the criminal aspect. That's why anybody who has a family member who has been abused or neglected, they need to go to Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, call DHR, call their law enforcement agency to see if there's a criminal action there. That's the first thing they need to do. And then later on, they can worry about a possible civil action for money damages, and that's where they need to get an attorney involved for that.
Okay, and you're handling it really just on the civil side,
That's
is that
right.
correct?
That's right. And there can be civil cases like this for money damages even when there aren't criminal cases, but just oftentimes in the cases I handle, because the abuse is so bad, like I said, from murder to sexual abuse to things like that, the law is involved.
Now, typically, being on the civil side, if there happened to be a companion criminal case involving the same type of conduct, are you typically kind of having to sit back and wait and let the criminal case unfold?
A lot of times the law is, technically a lot of times you can't get the records you need from law enforcement until their investigation is over, but sometimes it's so cut and dried you can move forward with your case. Say, for example, you're suing an individual who's been charged with murder. Well, you can still go forward against the case of his employer and try to get them, if they're responsible too, in some sort of way.
But obviously, individuals have the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination, and they don't, if they're under a criminal investigation, they're not going to want to talk to anybody about what happened.
That's right, and oftentimes the criminal like that, in that example, they don't have any money anyway to sue for.
Yeah.
So you're always trying to find somebody else that you can hold responsible, such as an employer and things like that.
What is the context of where you're seeing this type of abuse? Is it typically a family member or a friend, or do we still have a problem in society where people are in groups homes or nursing homes and other types of places being subjected to actual abuse?
It can be parents, like you said earlier and like you just said, but oftentimes it's foster parents. They're doing this abuse. It can be caregivers at nursing homes, caregivers at mental health facilities, group homes for disabled people, schools. It's happening anywhere you can think of. I'm probably not getting them all right now, but they'll come to me, but it's alarming.
Well, I would think that one of the delicate situations you have to deal with is you're dealing with a disabled person that oftentimes is in some type of group home or facility. If they're the subject of abuse, oftentimes there aren't a lot of options of where to put these people. So here they are in a very difficult situation, maybe being subject to abuse. I guess as part of what you have to do is to find these people or help the family find an alternative place for them to live.
And that would be ideal, but the problem is in these places, oftentimes they're put in like mental health facilities, psych wards and hospitals, like you said, even nursing homes. There's a code of silence on this abuse. If there's a bad facility, and there are good facilities out there, but if it's a bad facility and the caregivers are doing the abuse, falsifying records to show they're taking care of their people when they're not, things like that are going on. There is that code of silence, and it's hard to crack it, but when you do, somebody will usually roll and you can get them talking and have a good case for your client.
Time for us to take our first break of the evening. So we'll be back, Tommy and Carter. We'll be back to them in just a moment. As we head to break, a reminder, are you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook? Because Hollis Wright is a great resource, a great legal resource, information, education. Be sure and check them out on your favorite social media platform. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm. Thank you for watching The Attorneys. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury-related topics, you can call, email, or text us. Or you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or simply contact us by going to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us watching The Attorneys.
Welcome back into the attorneys. Appreciate you being with us tonight. Hey, a quick reminder, attorneys from Hollis Wright standing by all throughout the program. So they are available right now, even as we speak. That free, confidential, and off-air conversation is yours for the taking. So take advantage of that. Carter?
Yeah, Tommy, I know that a lot of the cases that you handle will result in confidential type settlements, but without violating any of those confidential aspects of any settlement agreements, are there any examples that you can share with the viewers about the types of cases that you've handled?
Yeah, there's, like I said, there's too many. A lot of my cases have been against DHR and some of their employees, and recently I had one where a troubled teen, he'd been kind of shipped around to different foster homes, and those foster home parents were saying, we don't want him, and reporting problems with this child. You know, he's sexually acting out, he's physically acting out, he's messing with our real children, he's doing things like that. And this was all reported. He was supposed to get counseling, treatment. He gets put in his fifth or sixth foster home with my client, who he murdered, which is an extreme, but that's DHR placing someone where they shouldn't have placed them. I've got one going on now that's just straight up neglect or abuse, whatever you want to call it, here in Jefferson County, where DHR placed a victim into a facility, a boarding home, with no supervision, when they knew, and it was in their own policies and procedures, this lady needed help with her daily living skills. She couldn't take her medicine. She needed assistance with using the rest. She needed all the help she could get. They put her in a boarding home. Next thing they know, she leaves. They don't miss her, and she's gone for 2 weeks. They find her in a ditch here in town.
Wow. Let's deviate just for a minute. When you talk about DHR, we're talking about the Alabama Department of Human Resources.
That's
Is
right.
that correct?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Well, give the viewers a little bit of background on what DHR does and the types of departments that they have.
Yeah, and I say that about DHR. Sometimes they are involved in my cases in an adverse way, but they are there to help as well when children and elderly and people who can't take care of themselves have problems. They will do investigations, abuse and neglect investigations, and come in and try to protect the person who's been harmed. So they do that, but oftentimes in the kind of cases I handle, those workers at DHR are not doing their jobs and have caused harm, and it's tragic that they're supposed to be helping these people and they're not. Yeah. That doesn't mean they're not good DHR
Sure, they're
workers.
doing the best that they can under the circumstances, but as I understand it, there's an investigative component to DHR, but then the first incident that you talked about, that was more of DHR and their employees having a responsibility to place an individual into foster care and kind of monitor the behavior, and they were getting feedback of, hey, we can't control this individual, and next thing you know, it winds up in somebody getting killed.
That's right. They're supposed to take care of these people, give them the treatment they need, place them appropriately, and in those two examples, they were not. The child who committed the murder, he should have been placed in a facility for troubled teens. Those are all across the state. They knew that. We proved that. He should have been placed there, not with this lady who she'd been a foster parent for like a year. She didn't know kind of what she was getting into, but sadly this happened because they didn't do their job.
Did they have violence? Did that individual have a tendency of violence?
He did have a tendency to violence, and they knew it, and we got involved and had a wonderful client, and that case did resolve.
Well, since we're talking about it, though, I know immunity issues are always a big defense in these types of cases because you're dealing with a governmental employee, and they always like to say, well, we're immune to lawsuits, and of course there are exceptions to that, and I guess y'all were able to navigate your way around that defense.
Yeah, school employees, county employees, state employees, they have certain immunities that we don't have. They could be negligent in certain ways that we could be negligent in, but they're protected by immunity, we aren't. So school teachers, we've got to prove certain things to get around the immunity if they have been sexually abusing a student or something like that. Same with DHR workers. We have to prove they violated a policy or procedure or DHR that caused the harm to my client to get around that immunity. There are other ways around it. I've been doing it for 20 years, so we've kind of figured out some of the ins and outs of it to get it done, but it's very difficult. So these cases can be time consuming because you have to get over all those hurdles. Yeah.
That's good. A question we've got here, are there common defendants that your clients have had cases against? Is there kind of a common thread?
Well, we talked about DHR, their employees, mental health employees who have not caring for people who are mentally disabled, who have developmental issues, things like that. Teachers, like we talked about a little earlier, who have had inappropriate relationships with students. Sometimes in those cases, school cases, there can be student-on-student assaults, sexual assaults, or just straight-up bullying, things like that. Other workers at group homes, workers at the daycares we talked about. The priest thing, that's been recently, the molestation cases. One that really has kind of been in the news lately is employees at psych wards. There have been a lot of injuries and death in psych wards and mental health facilities because it goes back to the code of silence. These people can't talk for themselves. I mean, oftentimes they're not medicated properly and things like that happen, so there's that code of silence. But that's an issue I've seen lately. There really has been a problem in psychiatric wards and people receiving injury in hospital psychiatric wards as well.
When you represent these families, are you handling the cases on a contingency fee basis?
We do.
And explain what that is.
We do, and it's kind of like a car wreck case, you know, that you hear about all the time. A client comes in, we meet them. If the client's interested in hiring us or your firm, we'll do it on a certain percentage, meaning that the client doesn't pay anything. We pay all expenses up front, everything like that. If we lose the case, the client's out of nothing. We paid for experts, we paid for depositions, we paid for court costs, everything like that. If we win, then we get our expenses back and the client gets the percentage that we agreed on.
And on a statute of limitations basis, just a simple negligence case, 2 years from the date of the incident?
It's 2 years, but people need to think about, a lot of times in, like, for instance, these school cases, they're minors, so their case may still be on, or you may be able to file something after 2 years. And the mentally disabled, sometimes they're not competent, so the statute of limitations goes a little longer than the 2 years. Obviously, us as attorneys, we want to hear from them within 2 years because we're always worried about that statute of limitations. But
and one other thing to remember too, if you're dealing with a county entity, you've got a notice of claim within 6 months of the date of the incident to put the county on notice of a potential claim.
that's
Is
right.
that correct?
6
So
months.
a lot of things to consider.
6 months for a county and 12 months for a city, municipality.
Let's step aside. Our final break of the evening, let's take that. We'll pick back up right here whenever we get back. As we head to break, just want to remind you that the numbers for you to join our conversation, you got a few minutes to do so. We're about to wrap things up, so we're kind of hitting the home stretch. Text, that number is 205-670-1949, and call us at 844-LAW-TALK, 844-529-8255. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm attorney John Spade with the Hollis Wright Law Firm. If you have ever had a personal injury claim, the attorney handling your case has likely told you that a portion of your settlement would have to be used to pay back your health insurance company for the medical bills that they paid relating to your injuries. This is called subrogation. In this week's Legal 411, we are answering the question, what is subrogation and how does it affect your personal injury claim? When you purchase health insurance, you sign a contract with the health insurance company, which provides that in exchange for you paying a monthly premium, the insurance company will pay your medical bills when you're injured. Now, that contract has a paragraph that gives your health insurance company the right to seek repayment for the medical bills they paid if you in turn use those medical bills as a basis to recover from a third party that caused your injury. The idea is that your health insurance company would not have had to pay your medical bills if it weren't for the wrongdoing of the third party. Now, health insurance companies routinely put attorneys on notice of their subrogation claims by outlining exactly which medical payments the health insurance company is claiming a subrogation claim for and for what amounts. Throughout the handling of your case, your attorney should be aware of the amount of subrogation your health insurance company is claiming and whether all the claimed subrogation is related to your underlying personal injury case. That way, if your case resolves, your attorney can then negotiate a reduction of the health insurance company's subrogation claim. Subrogation is one of the many moving parts that can affect your personal injury settlement and what you stand to recover. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and our promise to you. Thanks for watching The Attorneys on WBTM 13.
Welcome back into The Attorneys. Just a few minutes remaining, about 7.5 in this show. So if you want to take advantage of that opportunity to speak with attorneys from Hollis Wright who are standing by live, you got about 7 minutes or so to do so, so give them a call. Carter?
Yeah, Tommy, you mentioned earlier about the tragic situation where the person, I guess, escaped or left the group home and was ultimately killed or found several weeks later. And it made me think about the kind of the delicate balance between confining these people enough, the ones that have disabilities, and at the same time still allowing them to have some level of liberty and freedom. And that has to be a very difficult task by anybody who has the care, custody, and control of somebody who has a physical or mental disability. Does that play a part at all in the cases that you're handling?
It does, and you're right. These people who do have these disabilities, they have the rights as everybody else in our country. They have citizens' rights as much, like I said, as you and me and David. But with the issues they have, it's a difficult balance. Like you said, the judges determine, caregivers determine, they need to be in the least restrictive environment possible. That's what they have to be in, and that's got to be determined. And it is difficult, but sometimes for a group home, for instance, if you've got a client at a group home who's known to elope, which means leave the group home on a regular basis, there have to be some restrictions placed on that individual. So, because you're worried about the individual getting out and something happening out there because they don't have their mental facilities or their disabilities are going to affect how they behave in our environment. For example, we had a girl one time in Opelika, and she was in a group home, and she was known to elope, and they wouldn't close the gate behind her. They wouldn't lock the doors when she was somewhere, and they knew she would get out, and she got out one day and she was raped.
Yeah, and a lot of times you're trying to balance that with family members that have their own wishes and desires about how their loved one is treated, and they want to kind of influence or dictate how they're doing it, but then like you said, they have a propensity or a history of engaging in this conduct, and so you really can get some tension in that respect.
It is difficult, and you're right, the families sometimes, they ultimately though, the families want their family member to be safe. Yeah. And I think they do understand that if there's some restrictions are necessary, they got to be put in place. And when they're not, if harm could happen to their family member, they don't want that.
Yeah, because we handle medical malpractice cases and nursing home type cases, and oftentimes we'll get calls and something will happen to a loved one and they'll say, well, they should have restrained them, or they didn't have them, restrained in their wheelchair, or they should have had the bed rails up, and all of this. And there's a whole body of literature out there about the psychological impact that restraints have on people and things like that. And so on the one hand, we're trying to get away from that, but on the other hand, they got to be protected.
That's right. And you're talking about restraints, I know, on another issue, but I've had lately restraints being involved in issues in these psych wards and mental health facilities where the workers don't know how to properly apply the restraints, and it's been so bad. I've had broken bones. There have been some deaths recently, improperly restrained cases, patients being improperly restrained. So yeah, that's an issue, but sometimes when an individual is off their medication or something like that and they have to be restrained, the people doing the restraining at these psych wards and mental health facilities need to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Tommy, you have a history in your legal career of taking on some pretty high profile cases. Any that you're working on now or that kind of come to mind that are headline making cases?
Well, I do have one, David, in North Alabama right now, a parolee who, while he was in prison, had escaped twice. He assaulted inmates, he assaulted guards. He shouldn't have been let out on parole via the pardon and parole pardon and parole board's policies and procedures, but they still paroled him. Well, he was supposed to be paroled to a facility that he was supposed to remain in for 6 months. They didn't. They put him in the Jimmy Hill mission here in town, where he was supposed to stay 6 months. He only stayed a month. Jimmy Hale Mission did what they were supposed to do, notified the state. State didn't do anything. So he's wandering around for 5 months out there, and he has three or four interactions with the police, law enforcement, and there were no warrants for him, no arrests, no holds, nothing like that. So he regrettably committed 3 murders in Gunnersville, one a 7-year-old child. And the governor has come out and the attorney general have come out, and they've admitted that there were screw-ups along the way that led to these deaths. And there has been a push because of these murders. The case is Jimmy O'Neill Spencer. He's the perpetrator up in Gunnersville. It is bringing about some good change to the pardons and parole system, and that's what my clients want. They want the state to accept responsibility for what happened. They want justice, and they want this change. And some good change is coming about because of it.
Now, are these abuse cases that we've been talking about tonight, or do you primarily file those in state court, or are they handled it all in federal court?
State court. State court. Now, some of the school cases,
right,
there can be some federal claims. In the school cases, if there's some sort of sexual component to it. But it kind of just, as you know, depends on the venue and what we want to do in the case. And some venues, as you know, are better than others. Sometimes we'd like a federal court to look at it or instead of a state court. But it's both, but primarily state.
We're just about out of time, right at 2 minutes remaining. We want to give both of you kind of a final thought from you. And Tommy, you first, if you would.
Well, we're talking primarily about abuse and neglect, and we didn't really get into much how many of these are unreported. Because of the code of silence that we mentioned earlier, and because these are the people, the mentally disabled, the mentally ill, they can't communicate with who they need to communicate. Say, look, I need help, or look, someone's abusing me. So you have to look for the signs of it. We didn't talk much about it, but look for your family member, bruises, things like that. Look for them acting different than they usually do. Just anything, if you even have a suspicion of abuse or neglect to a loved one, call DHR. And if it's severe, also get law enforcement involved. And if there's enough there, eventually you get all that straightened, and then you need to call a lawyer to investigate to see if there's a good claim for money damages.
Yeah, and depending upon the context of the situation, whether you're dealing with an elderly person or a child who has a mental or physical disability, there's a wealth of information, even on DHR and other websites, that the family members can go to in order to do research. Check out these facilities, do background checks. Have they had a lot of complaints of abuse? What does DHR have to say about them? Because you can find out a lot of information about these group homes and facilities and nursing homes. You'll never guarantee no abuse, but you'll go a long way in that regard.
We're all out of time, fellas. Appreciate Tommy, you being with us. Carter, good to see you again. And thank you for joining us as well. We'll look for you next time right here on The Attorneys. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.